Okay, so as I mentioned yesterday, the so we had looked at, again, the progression was the original book, sort of pro-reform, for lack of a better term, and the three letters in it, one by Rabbi Chorin, in which he basically argues that it's okay, these things that the reform want to do. That halakhically it's okay, and that there's actually some argument for it, even sociologically and religiously, whether it's to have more, it'll create more decorum and less talking in shul. By getting rid of the silent Amidah, people will understand what they're saying by praying in German. The organ will, help with structure and nobility. Not crazy arguments, but then of course we have the arguments from the Hamburg Bezdin against him specifically by name, both the Chassam Sofer and the other one that we looked at was the rabbi of, what's this letter? The rabbi of Trist. Of Trist. No, of Trist and Tafreshiad Teshin. Trist was a famous Hasidic town. Rabbi Eliezer of Trich. This must be Trist in Moravia. And his criticism of Rabbi Chorin is basically that he wants to make change, and that this is the way it's always been. You can't just go and change things, and that there's no, that. And he also makes a really important point, which is that this book Noga Tzedek, in it, the author basically writes to three rabbis, but those rabbis are not German rabbis. Why is he writing to a rabbi in Italy? Why does he cherry pick Rabbi Chorin and Rabbi Moshe Kunitz? Well, of course, the answer is that you pick the rabbis that you think are going to resonate with where you don't ask the most machmir rabbi if you can kasher your dishwasher, if he's machmir on dishwashers because you want to kasher your dishwasher. That's the way it works today also. But his criticism is a good one. I mean, they're not asking the main, they're picking who to ask. So then we have the same year, 1820, we have a book by Rabbi Chorin basically responding. I mean, it's a much more general book. It's a bigger book. I do have to thank Google. It's amazing what's on Google Books. A lot of times, if it's like a newer book that you really want to read, they just have a few pages, and then you got to buy it somewhere. But if it's an ancient book that that four people are ever going to look at, like one of Rabbi Chorin's books from 1820, it's on Google Books, which, Mark, you could tell them I said they're doing a good job here. This was, I guess, a certain library in Germany, and this is his book in 1820. It's called Davar B'Ito. He writes it kind of half in Hebrew and half in German, in Yiddish. It says German, but it's really, I think, Yiddish. For the Jewish people who know Hebrew, it's in their language, and those who don't know Hebrew, it's in Ashkenazi in German. Here's the publication information, and he writes even earlier in some other books about sort of ways that Orthodoxy needs to kind of liberalize. And in this book, it's pretty flowery, so it's not always directly to the point. But we'll look at 2 pages in which he kind of defends himself from the attacks by the Book of the Hamburg Bezdin. Interesting to look at it generally. Can look at page 31. And then we could look back at some other pages, get a sense of where he's going. But here he says, Ata Anisi B'Sefer Ele Divrei Habris. I'm going to answer my critics in Eile Divrei Bris. Eile Divrei Bris, of course, is the book of Hamburg Besdin. Shnitfas Hamburg, Shnas Avra, it was published in Hamburg in 1819, last year. Sham Siman Zayin, Orachaf Beis. We looked at this a little bit. It's page 32 there. Kasav B'Shem Ish Echad. It's written in the name of a certain person. I won't say his name. V'zel Lashona. Now, he's referring here to the letter of, to this letter of that I just mentioned of Rebbe Eliezer of Trist. Heim nishanim al mishanet kana ratzuthu chibur echad nikra nogat tzedek. So he's quoting now from his critic. Asher nidfas b'Dessau, this book Nogat Tzedek, published in Dessau, bli askamas chaver ir. It was without a approbation by accepted rabbis. Sham namar psak me'ezer rav b'medinas Italia, and there it has a legal decision from a rabbi in Italy. Shehiter l'zamer be'ergo b'Shabbos, who permitted playing the organ on Shabbos l'idei in Yehudi b'nei Yisrael levad, in b'nei Yisrael levad. By a non-Jew, right? So he doesn't seem to have such a problem with the Italian rabbi who, in Nogat Tzedek, said he could play an organ through a non-Jew. Now remember, Rabbi Chorin is from Hungary, so this is, and Chassam Sofer is from Hungary, and Moravia, I guess, isn't that far from Hungary, and so obviously it's a little bit more threatening. The rabbi of Erd, which is Rabbi Chorin, al kal kuliyatza, he basically, has left the whole game. He is permitting things and breaking down walls. So he says this rabbi is criticizing me of breaking down the walls of the Torah. Mileti Kalkal says that I'm destroying things. Lo uchal naso, gamli lev kamohu lo nofal anochi mimenu. I also have a heart like him. Lo nufal anochi mimenu. I am not, falling before him. Ubaruch Hashem anosan le'olev koach. God gives the weak strength. V'lashon limudim. And gives me the knowledge, the language, to save the public, save the masses. What do I want to save people from? There's a sin of suspecting those who are kosher, suspecting those who are, in other words, this is a little bit like not judging somebody meritoriously. That's a sin. Choshed b'ksherim, somebody who suspects those who are not, worthy of suspicion. Lazot bi'arti be'er hetev es divrei harishonim b'kinat emet. And he says, what I wrote clearly in that shuvah that I wrote in Nogat Tzedek. Sha'emet iti, and the truth is with me, halachically. How could he write? How could this rabbi from Trist, Rebbe Eliezer of Trist, how could he write about me that I'm breaking down walls? Adarab, just the opposite. Kol yeshi b'chol chefzi. All my aim here, all my desire was b'chazek b'dikei hageder, was to strengthen and to shore up the walls, and to surround religion with roses. Ashuva b'Shoshana means, it doesn't just mean what it might mean in English, it means, that's a phrase from Chazal, and it's a kind of protective hedge. Ashuva b'Era ikar hadin u'makoro. So I will answer here, and I will show where does the law really, what's the source of the law regarding what we're discussing. Rabbi Yehuda Anasi has already written in the Mishnah, Tefillah b'chol lashon, that you can pray in any language. V'hinei yishgada laYehudim, v'noda b'sha'arim, yotz l'negdi. And this rabbi, who is well known, has gone out on a war against me. Ba'omro, he says in Divrei Habris, he's quoting here another page in Divrei Habris. Siman Daled, page Yudaled. Let's see what that's referring to. It's page Yudaled. And if we mention him by name. Let's do a closer. I'm not sure what it's referring to on this page. This is a different rabbi. Let's see what this. That is written by Rabbi Mordechai Bennett of Nicholsburg. That's very interesting, actually. Rabbi Mordechai Bennett of Nicholsburg has come up for us before. He was the rabbi of, he was somebody in this whole discussion was his student. I'm trying to remember who. Somebody in Germany. I'll take a look at that. But here he says, "Od nira li barer shim omer avigaer temuras shem Hashem lo yatsa." It's clear to me that if you say the name of God in a blessing, and I tried to figure out what this word meant. I looked it up all over, but I couldn't really figure it out. It seems to be something like if you make a blessing and you use the wrong name of God, you don't understand what you're saying. If not, we should not make a blessing. Because we're worried about taking God's name in vain. Hello, yesh takana lomer habracha b'lashon las. Say the blessing in the local language. V'vadeim yomar avigar. This must be a name of God in a local language. In other words, like saying Lord or something. In other words, the issue is that if you, I think what they're getting at is that if you say God's name wrong, that you will have said a bracha in vain. So he's saying doing the bracha, I think is what he's arguing, is that doing the bracha in English is actually better because people are not saying the bracha correctly, or not saying God's name correctly. And therefore, if you did it in English, you would fulfill your obligations. So maybe that's even better. Do rak toar v'lo shem atzmo. If you say it in the local language, you're not saying God's real name. Ela al karchach de le'inyan has karat Hashem v'adei tzarich liyot b'lashon hakodesh. So he says it must be that God's name, when you say it, has to be in Hebrew. Who the Mesechus Brachos, it says in Brachos, if that's true, that you have to say God's name in Hebrew. No, I guess what he's saying is, if you want to argue, he's trying to argue that it's better actually to say the bracha in German. He says if you say it in Hebrew and you say it wrongly, you're taking God's name in vain. But if you say it in German, you fulfilled your obligation, and you're not running the risk of saying God's name in vain, because it's not God's essential name, even though you still fulfill your obligation. And the Gemara has a case where there was a certain shepherd who reworked the blessing, and instead of benching, he said, Brich Rachmana, blessed is the merciful one, Mari de Haipita, the master of the bread. And the Gemara says over there that if you mention God's name and God's sovereignty, that you have fulfilled your obligation. And he's saying over there, it doesn't use God's name, Yud Hey, Vav Hey, or Aleph Dal Nun Yud. It uses Rahmana, the merciful one. So you see that you could use a Shem Toar. You see, you could use a one of the many names of God that are not direct names of God, a sort of nickname of God for the bracha, right? Because we have 6 or 7 names of God that are essential. Names of God don't really have very good translations, or they do have translations, but they're closer to God's name. But then we have other names, like for instance, Shalom, the Gemara says, is one of God's names. You're not allowed to say Shabbat Shalom in the bathroom, the Gemara says, because you can't say Shalom in the bathroom because it's one of God's names. Rahman, a merciful one, is one of God's names. But they're secondary names. They're names that describe God rather than being essential names like Yud Hey Vav Hey or even Aleph Dal Nun Yud. Hainu davka di'eved v'chahayda le'el minei v'samuch ra'a et hapat u'midamrinan la hatam b'shas v'brichas shahakol al pat v'yayin diatz b'di'eved davka v'chatchila lule ra'iti lo ha'amanti shiatz devarim ka'ela mipi ish shochein roma v'lo shem b'tzion. So he's saying, this other rabbi is criticizing me that you can't really make a bracha in German. He says, I can't believe he even says that. Yan ki kol devarav mufrachim. All of his words is mufrachim is broken apart. Chado kevan shal kal panim hoda shebediavad yatsa ba'omer bruch. First of all, he does admit that you are Yotze. You do fulfill your obligation if you don't use God's direct name. If you say Baruch Rahmana, the Gemara says that you're Yotze. Im Omer Avigar Lo Yotze. So Avigar must be the name of God in German. Let me do a quick translate. Got. So that doesn't. Do a little bit more research on what Avigar is, but it's some kind of name of God. It must be Lord or something in German. So on the one hand, he admits that the Gemara says you do fulfill your obligation if you use a name of God that is not the direct name of God. On the other hand, he says no, you don't fulfill your obligation. And I'm saying actually that it's even better. And furthermore, since you do fulfill your obligation, it's not the best way to do it, but you do fulfill your obligation. Kain kushyata b'makoma omedet hadakaimalan safek brachos lahakel haliyesh takana lomer brich rachmana obchol hashon vein lecha di'eved gadol mizeh now kain lomer mehalo iri ulam bar min din Nelmo me'inav l'fisha divrei shasva poskim hare karalo. Okay, so I have to figure out what's going on here. I didn't realize he still continued with this. So I'm going to try and figure out what exactly his argument is. It's becoming a little bit less clear to me. He has another argument a little bit later, about 20 pages later, against what the Chassam Sofer wrote about him. But he is trying to argue here for, I think, for blessings in German and why that might be better. I think that's what he's trying to do. I'll clarify this a little bit first. Okay. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Clear there.
Thank you.